You've been told to fear the monsters, the violent criminal, the manipulative liar, the cold-blooded predator. Society trains you to spot psychos in the shadows, but that's not where the real danger hides. Carl Jung, one of the sharpest minds of the 20th century, saw something far more disturbing. He didn't fear the serial liar or the twisted criminal nearly as much as he feared the ordinary person, the one who smiles politely in public, the one who blends into the crowd, the one who always seems normal. Because Jung noticed something we don't like to admit. The people who appear most normal are often the ones who, under pressure, will go along with anything. They'll follow orders. They'll stay silent when they know something's wrong. They'll sacrifice truth for comfort, morality for acceptance, and their own soul for the illusion of safety. And that's far more dangerous than a lone psychopath. Why? Because the psychopath is isolated, predictable, a single spark. But normal people? When they move as a herd, they become a wildfire. Think about it. History's darkest chapters weren't written by lone predators. They were written by masses of ordinary people, neighbors, clerks, teachers, people with families, routines, and dreams, people who tucked their kids into bed, then went to work the next morning enforcing rules that crushed lives, people who shrugged and said, "I'm just doing my job." That's the horror Jung saw. Evil doesn't always wear a mask or snarl with fangs. More often it wears a suit. It stands in line. It blends in at the grocery store. And here's the terrifying part. Society depends on this blindness. We tell ourselves normal equals safe. That if someone looks like us, acts like us, believes what we believe, they can't possibly be dangerous. But Jung understood. When we deny the darkness inside us, we don't get rid of it. We bury it. And whatever we bury comes back stronger. This is why the ordinary person terrified him. Because they've convinced themselves they're good, moral, harmless. They can't see the shadow trailing behind them. And when a leader, an ideology, or even an algorithm tells them to act against their conscience, they obey. They obey because they want to stay safe. They obey because they don't want to stand out. They obey because blending in feels easier than thinking for themselves. And that's how the greatest horrors of history were carried out. Not by monsters, by neighbors, by colleagues, by ordinary people. Now, pause. Ask yourself this: who do you actually fear more? The obvious predator who shows his teeth? Or the polite neighbor, the smiling coworker, the family member, who might one day betray everything just to remain normal? This is the question Jung forces us to confront, and in the next few minutes, we'll pull back the mask of normalcy, uncover why ordinary people are more dangerous than psychopaths, and reveal how this hidden truth applies to your life right now, in ways you might not want to hear. Because here's the forbidden truth. If you don't face your own shadow, you risk becoming exactly the kind of ordinary person Jung feared the most. Jung didn't make this observation in a vacuum. He lived through 2 world wars. He watched entire nations unravel. And what disturbed him most wasn't the dictators at the top. It was how millions of so-called ordinary people became instruments of destruction. They weren't all violent criminals. They weren't all fanatics. Most were just people who wanted to live a normal life. They had jobs, families. They laughed at jokes. They worried about bills. Yet, when the collective tide shifted, they obeyed. They submitted to authority. They became part of a machine that swallowed millions. Jung's radical claim was this: the collective psyche, the mass mind, is more dangerous than the individual psychopath, because one psychopath can only cause so much damage. But the herd, when ordinary people act together without thinking, without questioning, They can build systems of destruction that no single criminal could ever dream of. Think about it. A psychopath might harm a handful of people, but when normal people surrender their individuality to the group, they can design factories of suffering. They can industrialize cruelty. They can turn horror into policy, into procedure, into routine. And the scariest part? They don't see themselves as evil. They see themselves as good citizens. That's the paradox Jung pointed out. The psychopath knows what he is. He's an outsider. He's a threat you can spot. But the ordinary person who blends in, follows the rules, and never questions authority, that's the one you should really fear. Because they'll enforce the rules without hesitation, no matter how twisted those rules become. And here's where this hits home for you. You like to think you'd resist, that if you lived in a different time, under tyranny, under corruption, you'd stand up, you'd fight back. You'd be one of the few who said, "No, this is wrong." But Jung would challenge that belief. He'd say, unless you've confronted your own shadow, unless you've recognized your own capacity for cruelty, envy, cowardice, you're more likely to fold than to fight, more likely to blend in than to stand out. Look around today. Ordinary people cancel others online because it's the trend. Ordinary employees enforce soul-crushing policies because the boss said so. Ordinary citizens nod along to whatever the news feed tells them to believe because questioning feels uncomfortable. This is Jung's observation alive and breathing in modern life. It's not just about the past. It's not just about wars. It's about every single day you spend following the crowd without thinking. And here's the tension you can't escape. The more you convince yourself that you're normal, that you're good, that you'd never be part of the problem, the more dangerous you become. Because you're blind to the shadow, you're asleep inside the herd. And sleeping people are the easiest to control. So Jung's radical observation is this: the real danger isn't the lone predator in the alley. The real danger is the smiling clerk, the obedient worker, the ordinary friend. Because history shows us, time and time again, that when the collective moves, they'll destroy more than any single predator ever could. And if you think you're immune, if you think you're too smart, too moral, too independent to ever fall into the herd, Jung would laugh. He'd say, you're exactly the type who should be most afraid. On the surface, ordinary people look harmless. They wear smiles, they shake hands, they say all the right things. But Jung warned, what you see is only the mask, the persona, the role they play to fit into society. That mask is carefully crafted. At work, it's the polite employee. At home, it's the dutiful parent. On social media, it's the curated, filtered version of perfection. And here's the problem. When you spend your life wearing the mask, you start to believe you are the mask. You convince yourself that the polite, smiling version of you is the whole truth. But it's not. Because behind that mask lurks something darker, the shadow, the repressed impulses, the envy, the rage, the hunger for power, the desires you don't want to admit even to yourself. Now here's the paradox. The psychopath doesn't wear this mask in the same way. He knows what he is. He may hide it strategically, but deep down, he isn't lying to himself. The ordinary person, they lie to themselves every single day. They say, I'm good, I'm moral, I'm not capable of cruelty. And because they believe that lie, their shadow grows stronger in the dark. Jung saw it like this. The most dangerous person isn't the one who admits their darkness. It's the one who denies it, the one who pretends it isn't there. Because whatever you deny in yourself, you'll end up projecting onto others. That's why ordinary people gossip behind backs. That's why they silently cheer when someone else falls. That's why they follow cruel orders without blinking. They don't see it as cruelty. They see it as duty, as justice, as just the way things are. Modern example? Think about the corporate worker enforcing policies they know are unfair, the customer service rep who smiles while repeating, "Sorry, there's nothing I can do," the manager who cuts people down but hides behind the phrase, "It's just business." These aren't monsters in dark alleys. They're the people you pass every day, hiding behind masks of respectability while their shadow leaks out in subtle, poisonous ways. And when the pressure is turned up, when the system demands something worse, that's when the mask becomes the perfect disguise. The good citizen will follow rules that destroy lives. The loyal worker will obey orders that dehumanize. The caring neighbor will look away when cruelty happens right in front of them. This is why Jung's fear cuts deeper than most people are ready to hear. The mask of normalcy doesn't just hide darkness, it weaponizes it. It gives the shadow cover. It allows evil to operate undetected because it's cloaked in everyday politeness. And if you're thinking, well, at least I'm aware of this. At least I'm different. Careful. That thought is the mask speaking again. Because the moment you insist you're immune, that you'd never do what others do, you're blind to your own shadow. So the question isn't whether you wear a mask. You do. We all do. The real question is, how much of yourself have you hidden behind it? And when the pressure comes, when society demands obedience, will the mask crack? Or will you become exactly the kind of ordinary person Jung feared the most? One person in a mask is dangerous, but when millions of masked individuals merge together, something far worse emerges: the herd. Jung understood this instinct better than most. He saw that the collective unconscious, the hive mind, has a terrifying power. When people surrender their individuality to the group, they stop thinking for themselves. They stop questioning. They become extensions of something larger. And that's when ordinary people commit extraordinary horrors. Alone, a person hesitates. Alone, a person wrestles with their conscience. Alone, they might stop themselves. But inside the herd, that hesitation vanishes. Responsibility dissolves. Guilt evaporates. You're no longer you. You're just part of the crowd. That's why Jung feared the herd more than any lone psychopath. Because in the herd, morality collapses. People don't ask, "Is this right?" They ask, "Is this what everyone else is doing?" And once the herd starts moving in one direction, good luck stopping it. History proves this over and over. Entire nations have fallen into darkness, not because a single leader had evil ideas, but because ordinary people chose to follow. Think about it. In times of war, who carried out orders? Not just fanatics. Ordinary soldiers, ordinary officers, ordinary bureaucrats stamping papers, running trains, managing logistics. The herd turned evil into routine. Now, fast forward to today. Do you really think the herd instinct is gone? Look around. The mob doesn't always gather in stadiums or rallies anymore. It gathers online, on comment sections, on hashtags, on social feeds where people pile onto whoever the algorithm tells them to hate this week. Ordinary people, sitting behind screens, become executioners with keyboards, not because they're evil, but because they're swept up in the herd. They think, everyone else is doing it, so it must be fine. This is where it gets terrifying. When you're in the herd, you don't feel cruel. You feel righteous. You feel powerful. You feel safe because the group is protecting you. But Jung would say, this is exactly when you've lost yourself. And here's the paradox. The psychopath, in his own twisted way, at least knows he's an outsider. The herd doesn't. The herd thinks it's virtuous. The herd believes it's defending truth, protecting morality, preserving order. That's why the herd is unstoppable until it destroys everything in its path. So ask yourself, when was the last time you went along with the crowd, even when something in your gut told you it was wrong? When was the last time you stayed silent to protect yourself? When was the last time you thought, well, everyone else is doing it, so maybe I should too? That's the herd whispering in your ear. That's the collective unconscious pulling at you, dissolving your individuality, turning you into one more mask in the faceless swarm. And here's Jung's forbidden truth. Once you're in the herd, you're capable of anything. Yes, anything. Even the things you swore you'd never do. This is why he feared the ordinary person. Because the ordinary person is never just an individual. The ordinary person, given the right conditions, becomes part of the herd. And the herd is capable of horrors no single predator could ever accomplish. So the next time you see a crowd chanting the same words, typing the same slogans, believing the same truths, don't feel comfort. Don't feel unity. Feel fear. Because history shows us, when the herd moves, it doesn't care who gets trampled. If the herd is dangerous, it's only because individuals carry a secret inside them, a shadow. Jung believed every human being carries impulses, desires, and instincts that they don't want to admit. The envy, the anger, the hunger for control, the fantasies you'd never dare say out loud. But instead of facing this darkness, most people bury it. They repress it. They lock it away in some basement of the psyche and pretend it doesn't exist. And that's the real danger. Because whatever you bury doesn't disappear. It festers. It leaks out in twisted ways. The psychopath at least acknowledges his impulses. He doesn't hide from them. You know what you're dealing with. But the ordinary person, they're convinced they're good. They tell themselves, I'm moral. I'd never do anything cruel. That's why Jung saw ordinary people as more terrifying. They can't see the shadow in themselves, so they project it onto others. Think about it. The parent who screams about immorality while secretly addicted to the very things they condemn. The neighbor who smiles in public but quietly seethes with envy when you succeed. The coworker who plays nice but sabotages you behind your back. This is shadow projection in real life. And when millions of people are projecting their shadow at once, the herd becomes a storm. Suddenly, entire societies create scapegoats. Entire groups get labeled as the enemy. And because everyone believes their hands are clean, they can justify any cruelty. That's how ordinary people convince themselves they're righteous, even when they're destroying lives. They're not evil, they say. They're protecting morality. They're defending the truth. They're just doing what good citizens do. And if you think this only happens in dictatorships or wars, think again. It happens every single day. When someone gets mobbed online, not because of what they did, but because they became the projection screen for other people's shadows. When a workplace turns toxic, not because of one villain, but because dozens of ordinary employees quietly play along. When you yourself find pleasure in someone else's downfall, telling yourself it's justice, when deep down it's envy or resentment. Jung would say, until you confront your shadow, you'll always be its puppet. You'll think you're acting from virtue, when in reality, you're just releasing repressed darkness onto someone else. This is why normal people commit horrors while believing they're saints. They've buried their shadow so deep, they mistake cruelty for morality. And here's the hardest truth. Your shadow is always closer than you think. It shows up in your irritation when someone challenges you, It shows up in your secret wish that others would fail so you can feel superior. It shows up in the excuses you make for why it's okay to bend the rules just this once. That's the shadow talking, and the more you deny it, the more power it has over you. This is why Jung urged people to face their own darkness head-on, not to indulge it, not to glorify it, but to acknowledge it, because only then can you control it. Only then can you stop projecting it onto others. But most people never do. Most people live behind masks, convinced of their own goodness, while their shadow drives them like a puppet master. And when those people gather into herds, history repeats itself. So ask yourself this: what parts of yourself have you denied? What impulses have you buried so deep that you pretend they don't exist? Because until you face them, you're not in control. Your shadow is. And that makes you, yes, you, far more dangerous than the psychopath you fear. The scariest evil isn't loud, it isn't dramatic, it isn't a villain twisting his mustache or a psychopath laughing in the shadows. The scariest evil is quiet, efficient, ordinary. Jung saw this firsthand. Entire nations didn't descend into chaos because millions of people suddenly turned into bloodthirsty maniacs. They descended because millions of people followed orders, stamped papers, filed reports, operated trains, did their jobs. This is what later thinkers called the banality of evil. Evil carried out not by monsters, but by clerks, by neighbors, by everyday men and women who wanted nothing more than to feel normal. They weren't all raging ideologues. Most weren't even true believers. They were just ordinary. And ordinary was enough. Because when you put on the mask, repress the shadow, and step into the herd, you become capable of anything. Not because you wanted to be evil, but because you wanted to belong. You wanted to keep your job, protect your family, avoid standing out. And that's how horrors happen. Not with fangs and claws, but with signatures on documents. With rules followed without question. With people telling themselves, I don't make the decisions, I just carry them out. Now stop for a moment and think about today. Do you believe this only belongs to the past? Do you think humanity has evolved beyond this? Look around. Bureaucracies still run our lives. Algorithms still dictate what we see. Ordinary employees still enforce policies they know are unfair. People still say, I'm just doing my job. The technology is different. The structure looks cleaner. But the psychology is exactly the same. When an algorithm recommends destructive content and millions consume it, who is responsible? The coders who built it, the executives who approved it, the users who spread it. Each will say, it wasn't me. I was just playing my part. That's the banality of evil in the digital age. No one feels guilty because no one feels responsible. And yet, the machine keeps running. This is what terrified Jung, because evil doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it hides inside systems so normal, so routine, that you don't even notice what you're part of until it's too late. And if you think you'd resist, be honest. Would you really risk your career to oppose an unjust system? Would you really break away from the crowd when everyone else is obeying? Would you really choose truth if it cost you your comfort, your safety, your belonging? Jung would say, unless you've faced your shadow, the answer is no. You'll obey. You'll rationalize. You'll join the herd and tell yourself you had no choice. That's the terrifying thing about the ordinary person. They don't see themselves as villains. They see themselves as decent, moral, respectable. And that's exactly why they're capable of the worst. So here's the forbidden truth. The real engine of evil isn't hatred. It isn't cruelty. It isn't the psychopath. The real engine of evil is obedience. Obedience from millions of ordinary people who would rather betray truth than break the illusion of normalcy. And the question you must confront is this: when the system asks for your obedience, will you resist? Or will you smile, follow the rules, and become part of the banality of evil yourself? The shadow Jung spoke of didn't die with him. It didn't fade after the dictators fell. It didn't vanish when the world swore never again. The shadow only changed its clothes. Today it wears the uniform of consumer culture. It hides inside glowing screens. It whispers through algorithms and metrics, likes and follows, trends and hashtags. And here's the most chilling part: it no longer needs force. It doesn't need soldiers on the street or police at your door. It just needs you to want to fit in, to crave approval, to stay inside the illusion of normal. Jung's warning echoes louder than ever. The greatest danger is man's own psyche. The collective unconscious, the herd instinct, didn't vanish. It evolved. And now, it's plugged into machines that never sleep. Look at your own life. How many of your opinions are truly yours? How many of your choices come from within? And how many are subtle echoes of the feeds you scroll, the ads you see, the group you fear disappointing? This is conformity without chains, control without violence, a prison where the bars are invisible because you built them yourself. And the tragedy: people think they're free. They think they're enlightened. They think they're choosing, but they're just moving with the current, following the algorithm, living someone else's script. That was Jung's nightmare, a society where individuals dissolve into the collective, where nobody feels responsible, where everyone believes they are normal and therefore innocent. But innocence is a dangerous illusion, because when you erase the shadow, when you pretend you're good and moral and just like everyone else, the darkness doesn't disappear. It grows stronger. It seeps out in obedience, in cruelty, in silence. And it's happening again. You can see it in cancel culture, where people destroy reputations not out of personal conviction, but because the herd demands it. You can see it in corporate culture, where employees keep their heads down and obey systems they know are corrupt. You can see it in governments, where officials excuse their choices with, "I was just following orders." The modern world doesn't need tyrants to enforce conformity. We enforce it ourselves. We watch each other. We police each other. We exile anyone who dares to step outside the illusion of normal. That's why Jung's warning matters now more than ever. Because the real psychopaths aren't hiding in the shadows. They're hiding in plain sight, in your office, on your street, in your social circle. And maybe, if you're honest, in yourself. The shadow doesn't go away because you ignore it. The herd instinct doesn't vanish because you tell yourself you're different. If you don't confront it, if you don't take responsibility for it, it will rule you. And when it rules enough of us, society repeats the cycle: obedience, repression, destruction. So Jung leaves us with a terrifying challenge. Do you dare face the shadow within you? Do you dare break from the herd? Do you dare be abnormal in a world where normal is the true danger? Because if you don't, the story repeats. And next time, you won't see the villain coming. Because the villain will look ordinary. The villain will look familiar. The villain will look like you. So now you understand why Jung feared ordinary people more than psychopaths. Because it isn't the lone monster that destroys civilizations. It's the millions of people who quietly go along, who stay silent, who conform. That's the unbearable truth. Evil doesn't always arrive with a mask and a weapon. It arrives with a smile, a handshake, a polite, "I'm just doing my job." And here's the part you cannot escape. It isn't just them. It's you. Because your shadow is always there. Every time you bury your anger. Every time you envy a friend but pretend you're happy for them. Every time you stay quiet when you know you should speak. Every time you obey the herd because it's easier. That's when the shadow grows. That's when the ordinary in you becomes dangerous. And Jung's challenge was brutal. Stop pretending you're innocent. Stop pretending you're normal. Face the darkness inside you. Drag it out of the basement of your mind. Look it in the eye. Because the only thing worse than a monster is a monster who doesn't know they're a monster. That's why Jung didn't glorify being normal. He warned against it. To be normal is to be asleep. To be normal is to obey without question. To be normal is to dissolve into the crowd and let the collective carry your conscience. And if you stay in that place, history guarantees one outcome. The cycle repeats. We've seen it before. We'll see it again. Unless you step outside the herd. So here's my question to you. Will you keep pretending you're normal? Or will you do the one thing society fears most, become an individual? Not in the fake sense of be yourself platitudes, but in the brutal sense of facing your shadow, owning your darkness, and refusing to project it onto the world. In the dangerous sense of saying no when the herd says yes. In the liberating sense of daring to be abnormal in a culture that worships conformity. That's the only way out, not perfection, not innocence, but self-knowledge. To know yourself so deeply that no herd can swallow you, no algorithm can program you, no authority can command you without your consent. And that's why Jung's words still burn today. The greatest danger to mankind is not some external enemy. It is the psyche of man himself. So I'll leave you with this. The next time you look in the mirror, don't just see your reflection. See the shadow behind it. Ask yourself, am I living as an individual or am I dissolving into the herd? Because history doesn't need more normal people. It needs individuals who dare to face themselves before the collective swallows us whole again. The choice is yours. Stay ordinary, or face the shadow and finally become free.